A king. A warrior. A visionary. He built the world's first great empire, not through fear, but through respect. His name was Cyrus the Great. But before he became a legend, he was just a boy in exile, marked for death. The winds of war swept across the battlefield, the ground trembling under the charge of thousands. Swords clashed, arrows darkened the sky, and the fate of an empire hung in the balance. But this was not the beginning. No, the story of Cyrus did not start with conquest, it started with a prophecy. A vision of betrayal. A king who ordered the execution of his own blood. A child who was meant to die, but lived. He was born to rule, yet he spent his youth as a commoner, unaware of the throne that was his by destiny. A boy raised in the shadows, whose name would one day be spoken with awe from the banks of the Nile to the mountains of India. But how did a small Persian prince rise to conquer the world? What made him different from the tyrants who came before him? And why, after 2,500 years, does his legacy still shape the world today? This is the story of Cyrus the Great, the forgotten king who changed history forever. But before Cyrus was born, the stars had already sealed his fate. A nightmare haunted King Astyages of Media. A vision of his own bloodline rising against him. Night after night, the dream tormented him. A great flood, surging from the east, drowning his kingdom, swallowing his throne. He awoke in a cold sweat, his mind racing. The palace seers whispered among themselves before delivering the truth. His grandson, the unborn child of his daughter Mandane, would one day overthrow him. Fear turned to fury. He would not let fate dictate his end. Mandane had been married off to a lesser Persian noble, an insult meant to keep any potential heir weak and insignificant. But that was not enough. Astyages summoned his most loyal servant, Harpagus, and gave a simple order: kill the child the moment he is born. The baby's cries filled the chamber, a newborn, innocent, unaware that his life had been sentenced before it even began. Harpagus hesitated. Killing an infant, the blood of the royal line, there would be consequences. But fear of the king was greater. He wrapped the child in a cloth and carried him through the palace halls, heart pounding. Yet, when he reached the execution grounds, his hands would not obey. Instead, he made a choice that would alter the course of history. He gave the child to a humble shepherd and his wife, far from the reach of the Median throne. And so, the boy meant to die, lived. Unaware of the destiny written in the stars, the infant Cyrus grew up in the foothills of Persia, running through the fields, playing in the dust. He did not know the weight of the blood that ran through his veins. But one day, the world would. Because the boy marked for death would not only survive, he would rise. And when he did, he would shake the world. Cyrus was never meant to live. But fate does not bow to the will of kings. Far from the grand palaces of Media, a child played in the dusty foothills of Persia, chasing the wind, climbing the rugged cliffs that overlooked endless plains. He was not raised among nobles or warriors, but among shepherds, simple people who knew nothing of the prophecy that once marked him for death. To the world, he was just another boy. But there was something different about him. Persia, at the time, was little more than a vassal under Median rule. A people proud of their heritage, yet forced to bow to a foreign king. The Medes ruled through dominance, demanding tribute, controlling the lands with an iron grip. The Persians had leaders, yes, but none dared to challenge their overlords. None, except for a boy whose true identity had been hidden from him. Cyrus was strong-willed, quick-witted, and unshakable. He did not follow, he led. Even as a child, the other boys instinctively looked to him for direction. If there was a dispute, he resolved it. If there was a challenge, he overcame it. By the time he was a teenager, something remarkable had begun to happen. While other boys played, Cyrus drilled them into formation. He organized their games into battles, dividing them into groups, teaching them how to move as a unit, how to outmaneuver an enemy. What had started as childhood play had become something more. A disciplined force was forming, not of soldiers, but of boys. At first, the villagers watched with amusement. But then, something changed. These were no longer mere games. Cyrus' tactics were advanced, his leadership undeniable. Word began to spread. The way he spoke, the way he commanded without force, the way people followed without question, it was unnatural. It was noble. And then, one day, a Persian noble happened to pass through the village. He stopped, watching as the young men moved in unison, following the orders of a boy barely into his teens. He saw the strength in his stance, the fire in his eyes, the unmistakable presence of a leader. And then it clicked. He had seen that face before, in the halls of the Median court, in the features of King Astyages himself. The boy before him was no ordinary village child. He was royal blood, the lost prince of Persia. The secret was out. Cyrus was not a shepherd's son. He was not a simple Persian boy. He was the rightful heir to a throne he never knew existed. And his destiny could no longer be denied. When the truth was revealed, the world of young Cyrus shifted overnight. The shepherd's son, who had spent his days tending flocks, running through the rugged hills of Persia, was no mere commoner. He was the lost prince of an empire. The noble who recognized him wasted no time. He sent word to King Astyages in Ecbatana, the grand capital of Media. The king, now much older and hardened by years of rule, could hardly believe it. The grandson he had once ordered to be killed was alive. Astyages summoned Cyrus to his court immediately. The boy who had grown up in the wilds was now escorted under heavy guard, his fate uncertain. Would the king finish what he had started all those years ago? The journey to Ecbatana was long, the golden walls of the Median capital towering over the landscape as they approached. When Cyrus finally stepped inside the palace, a place that should have been his birthright, all eyes were on him. Nobles whispered, servants stared, and guards tightened their grips on their weapons. Astyages sat on his throne, studying the boy before him. Cyrus did not cower. He did not flinch. He met his grandfather's gaze with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his destiny. And then, the tension broke. Astyages laughed. The same king who had once feared this child now saw no threat in him. He dismissed the prophecy, calling it foolish superstition. Perhaps the boy had survived, but what could a mere shepherd do to an empire? He decided to spare Cyrus, but he would not make the mistake of keeping him close. Instead, he sent him away, back to his Persian family. He allowed him to live as a noble among Persians, thinking he would never rise beyond that. But Astyages had made a fatal mistake. He had given Cyrus a taste of power. Now, the boy who had once been content in the hills knew the truth of his lineage. He had seen the world of kings, the court of an empire. And most importantly, he had seen the weakness of the Medes. Cyrus returned to Persia a changed man. No longer just a shepherd's son, he was a prince, heir to a people yearning for something greater. And in the years that followed, that fire inside him would grow. Because the prophecy Astyages had dismissed was about to come true. For over 100 years, the Medes ruled over Persia. They had wealth. They had power. They had an empire. Into the world, they were unshakable. But all empires crumble when they forget their foundations. By 553 BCE, the once mighty Median Empire had begun to rot from within. King Astyages, now old and paranoid, ruled from Ecbatana, his magnificent capital in the mountains of Iran. He had crushed rebellions, silenced dissent, and ensured that the Medes remained supreme. But what he did not see, what he could not see, was that the greatest threat to his rule was not an enemy beyond his borders. It was his own grandson. Cyrus had spent years learning the ways of war. He had seen the weaknesses of the Medes, the arrogance of their nobles, and the resentment of their subjects. The Persians had been treated as second-class citizens, forced to pay tribute, forbidden from rising beyond a certain rank, their leaders chosen by Median governors. But Cyrus saw something different. He saw an empire that no longer inspired loyalty. He saw warriors who did not wish to fight for their king. He saw a moment of weakness. And he seized it. In 553 BCE, Cyrus declared open rebellion against the Medes. The news spread like wildfire. Persian warriors flocked to his side, their loyalty not forced, but freely given. They did not fight for a king, they fought for something greater. They fought for Persia. But Astyages laughed. To him, Persia was nothing, a small province, a minor rebellion. He had crushed far greater threats before, and he would do it again. He sent his armies east, believing they would end the war in a single battle. But he had underestimated his enemy. Cyrus did not fight like the Medes. Instead of facing their forces head-on, he used hit-and-run tactics, striking their supply lines, cutting off reinforcements, forcing them to march deep into Persian territory where they could be ambushed at every turn. For 3 years, the war raged across the Iranian plateau. At first, it seemed as if the Medes would hold their ground. But then, something changed. Astyages' own generals began to question their loyalty. The Medes were no longer fighting for a cause. The Persians were. And soon, even his closest allies began to waver. The final battle was about to begin. So, in 550 BCE, Astyages had had enough. He assembled his entire army, thousands of warriors, the finest Median cavalry, battle-hardened soldiers from across the empire. And he marched straight for Pasargadae, the heartland of Persia. But Cyrus was waiting. He did not fight to survive, he fought to win. And he had a plan. As the Median army charged forward, Cyrus ordered his forces to feign a retreat. The Medes, believing the Persians were fleeing, broke ranks to chase them down. And that was when Cyrus struck. From the flanks, hidden Persian units ambushed the Medes, cutting through their exposed lines. Their discipline collapsed. The battlefield turned into chaos. Astyages, watching from his command post, realized too late, he had walked into a trap. And then, the unthinkable happened, his own men turned against him. Harpagus, his most trusted general, the very man he had once forced to watch his own son be killed, led his troops in open defiance. The Medes no longer fought for their king. They surrendered to Cyrus. By nightfall, it was over. Astyages, the once mighty ruler of the Medes, was captured by the grandson he had tried to kill. But Cyrus did not execute him. Instead, he took him in as an honored prisoner, proving that he was not just a conqueror, he was a ruler who understood mercy. With the fall of the Medes, Cyrus the Great became the undisputed king of Persia. But he did not stop there. He did something unheard of in history. He did not destroy the Medes. He united them. He took their army, their cities, their people, and merged them with Persia, creating the foundation of the First Persian Empire. For the first time, a ruler had risen not by crushing his enemies, but by bringing them into something greater. The prophecy had come true. The boy meant to die had not only survived, he had conquered. But this was only the beginning. Because now, the entire world lay before him. By 547 BCE, the world had taken notice of Persia's rise. From the once forgotten province of the Medes, Cyrus the Great had forged a new power, sweeping through the lands of Central Asia with a growing army and an unbreakable will. But to the west, in the land of gold and legend, one man refused to take him seriously. His name was Croesus, king of Lydia, the richest man in the known world. Lydia was a kingdom of immense wealth, stretching across western Anatolia. Its capital, Sardis, stood as a symbol of luxury, its streets lined with treasures from all corners of the ancient world. Croesus ruled over it all. He had watched the Persian uprising from afar, amused by the stories of a former shepherd boy who had dared to challenge the Medes. To him, Cyrus was nothing more than an upstart, an inexperienced ruler playing at war. Confident in his own power, Croesus mocked Cyrus openly, sending envoys with condescending messages. A man who was raised among sheep should stick to herding them. But Cyrus was no mere shepherd. And when Croesus sent his armies eastward to crush the Persian rebellion, he had no idea that he was walking into his own downfall. Croesus, believing that Lydia's cavalry and wealth made him unstoppable, marched his forces toward Tyria, in eastern Anatolia. Cyrus met him head-on. The Persian and Lydian armies clashed in brutal combat, but neither side secured a decisive victory. Knowing winter was coming, Croesus retreated to Sardis, assuming Cyrus would not pursue him. He made a fatal miscalculation. In ancient times, winter was the season of peace. Wars paused, soldiers returned home, and kings prepared for the next year's campaign. But Cyrus was no ordinary king. He did what no one expected. He chased Croesus back to Lydia, marching his army through the bitter cold, catching the Lydians completely unprepared. By the time Croesus realized the mistake, Cyrus was already at the gates of Sardis. Croesus had no choice but to fight. He assembled his full army on the plains of Fimbra, just outside Sardis. The Lydians had one great advantage: their legendary cavalry, some of the finest horsemen in the world. But Cyrus had studied his enemy well. He had a plan. Before the battle began, he placed camels in front of his infantry lines, an unconventional move that confused his own soldiers. But Cyrus understood something crucial: horses feared camels. As the battle began, Croesus unleashed his cavalry, expecting them to smash through the Persian lines. But as they charged forward, the scent and sight of the camels panicked their horses. Chaos erupted. The Lydian cavalry, the heart of Croesus' army, fell apart before even reaching the Persian ranks. Their advantage was gone. And in that moment, Cyrus struck. He ordered his forces to fake a retreat, luring the Lydians into chasing them. Once the Lydians took the bait, Cyrus' hidden troops emerged from both flanks, closing in like a trap. Croesus watched in horror as his mighty army collapsed around him. By nightfall, Lydia had fallen. The richest kingdom on earth was now in Persian hands. The custom of the time was clear: Croesus should have been executed. But Cyrus was not like other kings. Instead of killing him, Cyrus made Croesus his advisor, placing him among his inner circle. Why? Because Cyrus understood something greater than war. He knew that power was not just about conquest. It was about wisdom. Croesus had ruled one of the greatest kingdoms in history. He had knowledge, experience, and influence over the Western world. By sparing him, Cyrus did not just take Lydia, he gained the loyalty of its people. Most conquerors ruled through fear. They burned cities, slaughtered rulers, erased entire civilizations. Cyrus ruled differently. He built an empire not on destruction, but on respect. He showed the world that a king's strength was not measured by the enemies he crushed, but by the wisdom to turn those enemies into allies. Lydia had fallen. But in its place, the Persian Empire grew even stronger. And this was only the beginning. By 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great had become the most powerful ruler in the known world. He had crushed the Medes, humbled the Lydians, and united an empire that stretched from the mountains of Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean. But one final challenge remained. To the west lay Babylon, the greatest and most feared city of its time. A city of colossal walls, towering temples, and a kingdom that had stood for over 1,000 years. It was a city thought to be impregnable, undefeatable, or so they believed. At its helm was King Nabonidus, a ruler despised by his own people. A king who had abandoned Babylon for a decade, leaving his son, Belshazzar, to rule in his place. A king who had defied the powerful priests of Marduk, favoring his own god over theirs. Babylon was a kingdom ripe for the taking. And Cyrus was coming for it. Cyrus did not march blindly into war. He knew Babylon's defenses were legendary. Walls so thick that 2 chariots could ride across them side by side, an intricate moat system, designed to flood any invading army. Massive iron gates, impenetrable to battering rams. But no wall was too high for a mind that could see beyond it. Before striking, Cyrus sent spies into Babylon. What they found confirmed what he already suspected: the people were restless, divided, disillusioned with their king. The Babylonian army, once feared across the world, had grown weak, its soldiers unwilling to fight for a ruler they hated. Cyrus also reached out to the priests of Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon. They, too, had turned against Nabonidus, furious that he had neglected their temples. And so, in secret, they sided with the Persians. The war had not even begun, and Babylon was already crumbling from within. But Cyrus was patient. He waited. He planned. And when the time came, he struck, not with brute force, but with genius. Cyrus' army advanced toward Babylon in the autumn of 539 BCE, facing the full might of the Babylonian forces at Opis, on the Tigris River. The battle was swift. The Babylonians collapsed. Those who survived fled to Babylon, thinking they would be safe behind its walls. But walls mean nothing when the enemy finds another way in. For weeks, Cyrus and his engineers had been working in secret, miles upstream, where the mighty Euphrates River fed into the city. One night, under the cover of darkness, they put their plan into motion. They diverted the river. Slowly, silently, the great Euphrates began to sink. The river that had once protected Babylon turned into a dry path leading straight into its heart. As the waters fell, Cyrus' army slipped into the exposed riverbed. They marched beneath the towering walls, moving unseen, unheard. And when they reached the city gates, they found them unlocked. The Babylonians, caught in the midst of a festival, had left their defenses unattended. By the time they realized what had happened, it was too late. Cyrus had conquered the greatest city in the world, without a single battle inside its walls. King Nabonidus, once the ruler of the most powerful empire on earth, was nowhere to be found. He had abandoned his people. And in doing so, he had sealed his fate. The priests of Marduk welcomed Cyrus with open arms. The people of Babylon, who had suffered under Nabonidus' neglect, did not resist. Babylon, the jewel of the ancient world, had fallen not through bloodshed, but through strategy. And now, it belonged to Cyrus. But what he did next was unlike any conqueror before him. Most kings would have destroyed the city, enslaved its people, erased its identity. But Cyrus was not like most kings. He stood before the people of Babylon, not as a tyrant, but as a liberator. He freed the enslaved. He allowed all exiled peoples, including the Jews, to return to their homelands. He restored the temples that Nabonidus had neglected, honoring the gods of Babylon instead of destroying them. And he did something unheard of in ancient history. He recorded his policies in writing. The Cyrus Cylinder, history's first known declaration of human rights. On this small clay tablet, Cyrus proclaimed that all people were free to worship as they chose, no city would be looted or burned, no man would be enslaved for resisting the empire. A king who ruled not by fear, but by justice. A ruler who understood that an empire built on respect would last far longer than one built on violence. The fall of Babylon was not the end, it was the beginning of something greater. Cyrus' empire would stretch from the Aegean Sea to the Indus Valley, covering the largest territory the world had ever seen. His laws would inspire everything from the Roman Empire to the U.S. Constitution. His Declaration of Human Rights would be studied thousands of years later, even appearing at the United Nations in modern times. And yet, he was still only a man. One man, born a shepherd's son, who defied fate, overthrew an empire, and built a new world order. Cyrus the Great. The king who conquered without cruelty. The ruler who freed instead of enslaving. The man whose name still echoes through history. And this was his greatest triumph. By 530 BCE, Cyrus the Great had achieved what no ruler before him had dared to dream. From the Mediterranean to the Indus, his empire stretched across the largest territory the world had ever seen. He had conquered without cruelty, ruled without fear, and built a system that united people of different cultures under one banner. But not all saw him as a liberator. To the east, beyond the Persian heartlands, lay the vast and untamed steppes of Central Asia, a land of warriors who had never bowed to an empire, who lived by the sword and died in battle. Among them was Queen Tamiris, ruler of the Massagetæ, a fierce and independent people who roamed the lands beyond the Sir Daria River. And when Cyrus set his sights on her kingdom, he would make the greatest mistake of his life. Unlike the great cities of Babylon and Sardis, the Massagetæ had no walls, no palaces, no golden thrones. They were nomads, warriors who lived on horseback, moving like ghosts across the plains. They fought not for gold, but for honor. And they never surrendered. Cyrus, now nearly 70 years old, had defeated every army that had stood against him. He had faced the might of Babylon, the wealth of Lydia, and the power of the Medes. But this was different. His advisors warned him. This is not a city to besiege, nor a nation to bribe. The Astyages do not fear death. They welcome it. But Cyrus was relentless. He had never lost a war, and he would not start now. In the spring of 530 BCE, he led his army across the Jaxartes River, modern-day Sirdaria, marching into the lands of the Astyages. The battle for the steppes had begun. But Cyrus, always the strategist, devised a trap. Knowing that the Astyages lived off their land and supplies, he left behind a seemingly abandoned Persian camp filled with food, wine, and riches, a temptation for warriors who had never known such luxuries. Tamiris' son, Spartapizes, led a raid on the camp, believing it to be an easy victory. But it was a trick. As soon as the Astyages warriors drank the Persian wine, something they were not accustomed to, Cyrus' forces struck, the Astyages were slaughtered. Spartapizes himself was captured, humiliated before the Persian king. Believing he had won, Cyrus sent a message to Queen Tamiris, offering a truce. But she did not beg for peace. Instead, she sent him a message of her own. "You have taken my son, but you will not take my land. If you thirst for blood, then face me in battle, or return home and rule your people, leaving mine in peace." Cyrus did not return home. He prepared for war. The Astyages attacked at dawn. They did not fight like the Medes or the Babylonians. They did not stand in lines or march in formation. They struck from all sides, swift, brutal, and unrelenting. For the first time in decades, Cyrus was outmatched. The Astyages warriors fought with a ferocity he had never seen, ambushing his men, using the open plains to their advantage, cutting down his soldiers one by one. Cyrus refused to retreat. He fought among his men, sword in hand, covered in dust and blood. But in the chaos, he was wounded, a spear pierced his side. His body, once strong enough to conquer nations, betrayed him. He fell. And as the sun set over the battlefield, the greatest king of Persia, the man who had built an empire greater than any before him, was no more. The surviving Persians carried his broken body before Queen Tamiris. She looked at the man who had taken her son, the conqueror who had thought himself untouchable. She took a wineskin filled with blood, lifted his severed head, and spoke words that would echo through history. "You thirsted for blood. Now drink your fill." And so, the greatest king of Persia did not die in a palace, surrounded by gold and servants. He died in the dust, on the battlefield, against an enemy who refused to bow. His men, shattered and broken, carried his body back to Persia. They laid him to rest in Pasargadae, in a tomb as humble as the man himself. On the entrance, an inscription read, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, I know that you will come here, for I am Cyrus, who gave the Persians an empire. Do not begrudge me this bit of earth that covers my body." But his empire did not die with him. It endured. It became the foundation of the Achaemenid dynasty, the first true Persian empire. His successors, Darius, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, would build upon his legacy, ruling lands even greater than his own. But none would be remembered like Cyrus. For he was not just a conqueror. He was a ruler who understood mercy. A leader who built rather than destroyed. A king who shaped the world. And though his life ended in the dust of a battlefield, his name would live forever. The wind sweeps across the ancient ruins of Pasargadae, where time itself has bowed to the memory of one man. Here, in the heart of Persia, lies the tomb of Cyrus the Great, not a monument of gold, nor a towering palace, but a simple stone structure, standing alone against the passage of centuries. A king who once ruled the greatest empire on earth now rests beneath a modest slab of limestone. But his legacy? That has never faded. For Cyrus' greatness was never just in the lands he conquered, it was in the world he created. At its height, his empire stretched from Greece to India, uniting peoples of every culture, language, and faith under a single rule. But unlike those who came before him, Cyrus did not seek to erase or oppress, he sought to unite. He understood what few leaders of his time could: an empire ruled by force alone would crumble. An empire built on respect would endure. He granted his subjects freedom of religion, self-rule, and protection under law, ideas that were unheard of in the ancient world. And those ideas did not vanish with his death. They lived on. Thousands of years later, his principles would inspire the greatest political charters of the modern age. The Cyrus Cylinder, inscribed with his Declaration of Human Rights, would become a model for the U.S. Constitution, the Magna Carta, and the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. His policies of tolerance and governance influenced the rulers of Greece, Rome, and even the founding fathers of modern nations. In the Bible, he is praised as the Anointed One, the liberator who freed the Jewish people from Babylonian captivity and allowed them to return to Jerusalem. In the Quran, he is believed by many to be Tulkarnain, the just and noble ruler favored by God. In Greek history, he was admired by Herodotus and Xenophon, who saw him as the ideal ruler, wise, just, and honorable. Even in death, Cyrus' name did not fade. It became legend. Empires rise. Empires fall. Kings are crowned, and kings are forgotten. But ideas are immortal. And Cyrus' idea of a just empire still echoes through history. He proved that power is not in the sword, but in the ability to rule with wisdom. That the greatest victory is not in conquest, but in the ability to build something that lasts. And as the sun sets over Pasargadae, where his tomb still stands, a traveler stops to read the words carved in stone. "Oh man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, I know that you will come here, for I am Cyrus, who gave the Persians an empire. Do not begrudge me this bit of earth that covers my body." And in that moment, it becomes clear, Cyrus the Great never truly died. Because his vision still lives on. But here's the real question: could Cyrus have survived? Had he not marched against the Astyages, had he chosen diplomacy over war, or had he simply returned to Persia to rule from his throne, could he have lived to see an even greater empire? Or was his death inevitable, a fate sealed by ambition, the weight of conquest, and the unyielding cycle of history that spares no king, no matter how great? What do you think? Was Cyrus' downfall his own doing, or was he destined to fall on the battlefield, just as he had risen from it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was his fate avoidable, or was it written in the stars? Let's discuss. And while you're at it, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories of history.